Hi, and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to get started on a knitting project. For this session, you'll need your knitting needles and a ball of yarn. We'll use the straight knitting needles for this project as they're a little easier to manage. The first thing I'll show you is called casting on. It's sort of like laying out the foundation for the knitting project. Everything we knit will be hanging off of these beginning stitches. And the first part of casting on is making a slip knot. It looks like a mini lasso and it's pretty easy to make. To tie a slip knot, you make a loop with the yarn. Reach through the loop and grab the yarn that's close to the yarn ball. Pull it through and then pull the little yarn tail tight. This should give you a nice lasso shape. Practice it a few more times until you can do it easily. Then, when you're ready to move on to the next step, slide one of your needles through the loop and pull it fairly snug. Now that you have a good loop on there, let's start casting on. Hold the yarn, not the little tail piece, the actual yarn, with the smaller fingers of your left hand. Then, use your thumb to snag the yarn between your fingers and the needle. This creates a sort of sideways V shape. It's kind of a weird movement, so try it a couple more times, just to get the feel of it. Once you're comfortable with that, take your needle tip down to the very bottom and scoop up the lower arm of the V. Move your thumb out of the way and gently release the loop, then pull it snug on the needle. It can be a little tricky, so if it slides off of the needle, just keep at it until the movement gets easier. When it stays on nicely and looks like this, you've cast on a stitch. So counting the slip knot and the stitch we just added, we have 2 stitches on our needle. Let's add a few more for practice, and so we have something to work with when I show you how to knit the stitches. Grab, snag with your thumb, then down to scoop up the lower arm, gently release, and slide tight. Make sure it isn't extremely tight or you won't be able to get your needle back into the stitches later. We'll do a few more. If we're doing several in a row, you don't have to release the yarn with your smaller fingers in between, like this. Just pick up a stitch, another stitch. Now there are a couple fancier ways to cast on than the way I'm showing you, but this version is a great one for beginners. When you have 10 stitches cast on, we'll move on to the next portion of the lesson. Now I'm going to show you how to do the basic knit stitch. It's very simple. Hold the newly cast on needle in your left hand and the empty one in your right. I usually take the working yarn, that's the yarn that's coming off of the yarn ball, and loop it over my left forefinger to help it keep from getting tangled. This also keeps it close and handy for when we'll need it. Slide the tip of your right needle into the first stitch loop, this one right here, so that both needle tips are pointing the same way. Don't do it like this. That's for a different stitch called a purl. For a knit stitch, slide it into the bottom front of the loop so your needle comes out the top back of the other needle. You might want to practice the motion for a little while just to get the hang of it. In from the bottom. And sometimes if the stitches are tight, it's harder to get them in, so just loosen them up a bit. In from the bottom and out behind the other needle. Then loop the yarn over your needle. If you've crocheted before, this will feel a little strange because we're looping the yarn the opposite direction for knitting. You can use either your forefinger to loop it around the needle or just sweep it up with the needle like that. Then, and this can be the tricky part, carefully pull the new loop of yarn down through the center of the loop on the needle. Slide it off the left-hand needle and you've made a knit stitch. Now let's do another one. Be careful not to accidentally pull all these stitches off the other needle or they'll unravel and you'll have to start over. Through the loop on the left-hand needle and up out the back. Wrap the yarn and pull it down through. Slide it off so it's hanging on the right-hand needle and there you have it. Let's do a few more. Up through the stitch, making sure it goes behind. Wrap, pull down, and slide off. Slide them up toward the point. Up through, around, down, and slide off. Once you get the hang of it, feel free to practice more or just move on to the next lesson. If you get to the end of the stitches while you're practicing and want to keep going, just swap the needles again and start knitting back across the top of the row you already knit. Thanks for knitting with me. I'll see you next time.